Hello. Okay, hi everybody. Sorry for today's technical difficulty. I think my camera monitor just went off, and that's why the feed doesn't go through. My name is Eddie. I'm from PASM, from Hong Kong Photographer Group, as well as Vancouver Photographer Group. We will do this online tutorial about what is our camera mode, P mode, A mode, S mode, and M mode. So this is what we are trying to do. This is actually my first time YouTube live video streaming, so hopefully everybody can bear with me a little bit. I'm quite sorry that this time we have about 1 minute off air because of my monitor is not working. But anyway, we will discuss a little bit about PASM Photographer Group before we continue to our actual section about and explaining about PASM, this formal, and how do we use it and why we use it and everything. PASM Photography Group is originally from Hong Kong. We have two founders, Bailey and Brian. I'm very happy that I'm part of their team, and I help them to host some events. This group is originally from Hong Kong, and we hope to gather photographer, and then we share the same interests. We go to different parts of Hong Kong to take photos and everything. Recently, because of this COVID-19 situation, so everybody need to avoid as much as possible public contact, and that's why our group hosts this virtual tutorial in the last 2 months, and we will continue to do so in this year. Even though we might have some actual meetup later on in this year, but anyway, online tutorial will for sure to be continued, and the next one we will have will be about Lumina, how to use a Lumina to edit our photos and everything. So we will back to our topic now, okay? What are P mode, A mode, S mode, and M mode? This 4 letter actually came from Canon's camera. I'm using, I'm sorry, from Nikon camera, okay? From Canon user like me, we will have P mode, A mode, TV mode or T mode, and M mode. So I will explain each one individually. And before I explain any camera mode for you guys, first I have to explain the very fundamental one. It's called octo, okay? What is octo, okay? So it's like what we use our iPhone or our any mobile phone to take photos. This is like we just point at anything and then press a shutter and let the camera to do everything, okay? To calculate the ISO, calculate the shutter speed and aperture range. Everything will be calculated automatically by the camera. And then after a while, we will find that most of our octo photo, especially from our camera, somehow it doesn't always looks or comes out what we want. This is a little bit strange. For our what we call the mobile phone, actually it has always, you will find always, almost every time it did 100% correct, okay? Almost every time, but sometimes it might slip, okay? The exposure is correct, the brightness of the photo is correct, okay? It's not too bright, too dark, right? And then we don't have to worry too much about the aperture. Sometimes in the dark situation, we might not have a very clear photo. We don't know why. And then that's about it. But in bright date, every time our mobile phone nailed the photo, okay? Every time it's perfectly sharp and everything perfect. But then everybody wants to improve their photography. And then now we are talking about PASM now. The P mode is actually the first mode we try and encourage people to use, to understand. The P mode actually stands for programmable mode or program mode. What it actually does, it's kind of like octo, okay? In octo situation, it just point and shoot. P mode is similar to octo mode. It's also point and shoot. And the thing is, it allows you to also change what we call the exposure compensation. Okay, what does that mean? That means we can ask the camera, okay, to change how the photo brightness can adjust. Okay, so sometimes if we like to take just a very bright sunshine day, we can let the camera to decide everything. And also this is a little bit about how the camera will meter about the exposure. Okay, so usually exposure metering will be like everything will be in average, not center weighted, or it's like everything will be in average. Usually camera divide in 5 zones, but then programmable mode will just like let you to allow you to change how you want the photo. Sometimes we want the photo to be less bright than the camera finger is. Okay, so we ask the camera to change the EV to lower, or the exposure comprehension to be a lower value. Negative side will be the lower value to have a less bright photos. But then I usually don't suggest people to do in P mode for that. One of the reasons is because P mode, usually when you use it, every time it's more about speed. Okay, so it's like you get your camera out and then you point and shoot. So if you change too much setting, like how do you weight, how do you measure the light or brightness of the photo, and then you also change the EV and everything, you just waste too much time. So P mode is kind of like point and shoot, and it's like a fast gun. You just take it out and do all the shooting then. So in P mode, it's very similar to auto mode, except that we can control maybe a little bit dark and a little bit brighter. It can't do too much. If you are really like understand how the camera work, later on you will think in this way. It actually doesn't really help you too much because the camera do a lot of things too automatic, and you kind of force it back to everything manual. It's very difficult. So P mode, use it in some situation like street photography. Sometimes you want to enjoy yourself, to take some photos with your family, traveling photos, and boom, everything will be sharp. Or I should say everything should be exposed correctly. Okay, so then we get to the second and the third one, what we call the A mode and S mode. A mode is what we call the aperture prioritized mode or priority mode. And then the S mode or TV mode stands for shutter priority mode. So this two is actually a fundamental mode to help us to get a better creative photos. Okay, so as we explained in before, like few lessons before, we say camera is a tool to help us to create photos. I hope somebody have gone through our very beginning version, like in 1 minute we learn what is the aperture and what is shutter speed. Okay, if not, you might have to go through my video. Unfortunately, I haven't made any English version yet, so you might have to go online to other tutorial to find about shutter speed and aperture information. Okay, we back to the topic. We talk about the aperture first. Aperture is about the iris of the lens to allow the light to go through. Why I want to mention this two mode as a kind of like a creative mode, because it allows us to control what kind of photos and how we present our photos to our viewer. First, we talk about the aperture mode. Aperture mode is if we have a big iris, like the big aperture. At the same time, aperture, the bigger the hole, the lens open up, the actual aperture number is smaller, like 1 point something is actually have a bigger version. But if you have f8, actually the opening will be smaller. So this is something you have to remember, that is reverse. Okay. The thing is, when we want to create a photo, we need to think how we want the photo to focus on, and how we want to present the image or feeling to our viewer. Aperture mode is a very good idea, and it's also a very good start for us to do this kind of, I could say, composition and allow us to think less about the shutter speed and everything like ISO and so on. So how do we use it? Aperture mode, if we have the aperture as f1 point something or 2.0, the good thing is we can blur out the background. Okay, now you are seeing my f4 lens. I'm open up at f4, so you can see my background is not blurry enough. You can still see a little bit the computer, and also the screen a little bit, but not very clear. The thing is, we use this to help us to create the photo. Okay, we use this background blur to help us to create the photo. When sometimes we have the model, or we want to take a portrait. Okay, for example, we want to take a portrait. We want to focus on the model, the center person. Okay, and the background, we just want to give a little bit hints about what kind of background he is in the background, like maybe in a garden, maybe in a warehouse, industrial area. So in this way, we can have a more like a shallow depth of field, like we have more blurry background. In our previous explanation, we will say if the aperture number is smaller, we will have more background blur. If our aperture number is bigger, the opening is smaller, then everything will be more in focus. Last time when I did the tutorial, I explained to our classmate that if a real-time demonstration, we open up more aperture, you can see less clear of the background, and then also this also related to the distance between the main object to the camera, and then the main object to the background is also will affect the background blur. Okay, but we say aperture mode is help us to control how much background blur or the depth of field in the technical terms we allow. So why I suggest people will start from P mode and then to aperture mode. For one thing, we need to, in many situations in our daily life, we take portrait photos for our friends, maybe group photos for our family and everything, and of course we want to take some landscape photo. So with understanding how this aperture can control the background blur, we know what value we should use. Okay, for example, we gave the example like if a model, we just want to have the face to be clear, but the background and even the ear may be a little bit blurry, maybe f2.0. Or if we are having a group of people together to take a photo, will be 4.5 to 5 point something, or even 6 point something is okay. It doesn't really matter to open up the what I call the aperture every time. Okay, especially in group photo, try not to do that. Even though you say, oh, it's a very dark situation, I don't have much light, I need to open up my aperture to allow more light. Okay, in that case, you might allow more light. Okay, you might not need a very fast shutter in that case. But then the problem is your group of people might not get everybody focused. So we have to understand this, and then in group photo only 5 point something to allow more depth of field, so more people can be in focus. And then of course for like landscape photography, some of the very professional landscape photographer, they will check their lens to see which aperture is actually the most clear one, and then we will try to tell them that we range from 7 something to maybe to 10, but try not to go to something like 16, 22, those range, because the lens kind of will act quite weird in that kind of situation. It will have some technical explanation. It's like what we call the light will rebound inside the camera lens, not the camera, but the lens itself, and then the edge will be actually more blurry. Okay, so this is the situation, and I will. This is why we use the A mode to allow to control how much depth of field we have. Okay, so this is the great way to allow us to create. And then I will explain about the shutter mode, and then later I will explain why we use these two modes, especially most of the time. Okay, maybe some people will not allow with me, as to say agree with me, not allow, agree with me. But anyway, the next one is called the shutter priority mode. Shutter priority mode is more like to control how much time the shutter will open and allow the camera will record the time. So for example, we have a drop of water, we want to capture it in the middle of the air. So it has to be very fast, okay? Or the bird is flying through the sky, it's very fast, okay? So we need to change the shutter to be very fast mode, okay? It doesn't really matter how much your lens or your camera can stabilize, you can handheld it or whatever, because actually the object is moving, okay? When the object is moving, it doesn't really matter how stable you have a tripod or whatever, you just need a shorter time, okay, to capture a frozen image, okay, for birds, for droplet, or really fast action. So for example, if I want to capture an image for someone jumping over a fence or jumping or running, I would want to just capture that moment. So we have to speed up the shutter, sometimes 1/500th of a second. Or for bird, maybe I would suggest to use 1000. People say 500 might be enough, but sometimes I find 500 might not be enough. Somehow bird can turn their head quite quickly. I shouldn't say I don't understand, but this is the reality. Their movement are quite quick, okay? So use a faster shutter speed. If you cannot do it in 500, I suggest 1000. It's not something most of our camera cannot do, okay? And in case we want to even faster, okay, some of our basic DSLR, they will have shutter around 1/4000, okay, of a second, okay. This is very fast. Most of the situation should be fast enough. And then of course we have some medium range to high end. They have 1/8000 of a second. That is extremely fast. I can tell you, you need a lot of light, okay. And this is the thing, when you want to frozen some subject, okay, in very short period of time, we don't want the camera to guess how fast the object moves, okay. No wonder, I should say, no matter what kind of camera you have, no matter what kind of high-end brand camera, they cannot guess what should be the correct setting to freeze your subject. You are the one to control that, okay. Even though you get the 1DX Mark III, they can shoot like 20 frames, or the Sony A1 can shoot 30 frames per second. It doesn't matter. It cannot guess what should be the correct exposure, like the exposure time for shutter time, to capture that fast-moving object. Okay, so we as the photographer need to do it ourselves. Okay, and then on the other hand, the other way, we want to give the illusion of something moving. We need to use the shutter mode also. For example, like some light trail, you saw a lot of light trail photography, photos I should say, or someone moving, and then you have a little bit blur at their background when they're running towards the camera, and then there's some blurry on their back. You see the motion blur. This helps us to understand the movement or the motion of the object. So this is also another creative tool for us to allow this kind of moving subject to explain, okay. For this tool, okay, we will say we always want or suggest people to use this tool as a way to create our photos. The reason why we want to use A mode or the S mode as our creative mode to create our photo is because the camera can help us to think of a better shutter speed and also the ISO. When we say we set the aperture mode, that means the camera will decide, like the program mode. Program mode, the camera decide everything, except maybe you can fine tune a little bit about the exposure. But on A mode or the S mode, shutter mode, okay, these two allow us to control one of the, what we call the exposure triangle, either the shutter speed or the aperture. And then we left two items to allow the camera to control by themselves or itself, okay? So for example, in aperture mode, when we set the f-stop, the aperture number, to f4.0, My camera will decide what should be the ideal exposure time. And if we set even the ISO to be auto ISO, so the camera will try their best of their knowledge. Actually, it's their program knowledge. Okay, somebody when they make the camera, they let them know, okay, we shouldn't use a very high ISO speed like 12,800 or something. We should within 6400. But of course, some camera allow you to change the range. For me, I will try to set between 100 to 3200 because my camera still be able to produce very good quality photo at 3200. So I will allow the camera to choose the ISO and also the shutter speed. In that way, okay, the camera can choose a much faster shutter speed for themselves. So it will have more chance successful to capture that photos. Of course, you will say, oh, because why I can't set the ISO to 100? 100 should have a more clear photo. Yes, 100 ISO will have a very clear photo when it compared directly to maybe 3200. But if your object is still moving, okay, then there's no way your camera can fix it. Because when I'm moving like that, and if the shutter speed is not fast enough, you will still get a blurry picture. If, on the other hand, I let the camera to decide by itself, then it can, how should I put it in this way? It can allow the camera to use a faster shutter speed, but maybe sacrifice a little bit of the clarity, maybe a little bit more noise in the 3200 range. A lot of our modern camera can do really well in 1600. 3200 maybe need a mid-range camera. I think in the future 3200 can do a very good job, will be in like most of the entry camera now. Anyway, with this idea, we can concentrate everything with AMO about how much background blur we want. We can concentrate our creativity like our composition. And also we can concentrate about our group line up correctly, everybody smiling, okay? And then take the photo like that. I'm not saying that if you use you like to control everything is incorrect, but just that today I find it myself. In some case, I take photos of like a big group of people. You don't want to redo or focus or everything for 10 minutes or maybe 5 minutes, okay? They want to do everything like that, okay? It's like a snap of your finger. That photo has to be done, okay? One time I did a group photo with like maybe 60 students together. It's actually kind of difficult to ask everybody to stage and also ask them to line up or align everything, because you are the only one can see the whole picture of the whole group, like who is higher and who is lower, whose face is hidden from the other one, and then you just want to concentrate on those, control the crowd, okay, and press a shutter and everything sharp and everything clear enough. So I would suggest most of the time in that way, use the aperture mode and also let the camera to control shutter speed and also ISO. Okay, then the other one is about what we call the shutter speed mode. Shutter speed mode is what we explained before. It's like how we control our, our time of capturing for the photo. We give few examples like light trail. We need a longer time to expose the photos. Also, when we capture something flying very fast like a bird, then we need a very short burst to capture that moment. Or actually, we want to take multiple pictures of that bird, so make sure I get the good posture of that bird. So with this idea, in those kind of situations, okay, we try not to worry too much about the what we call the background blurry and ISO speed. We don't want to do that, okay? So that's why, similar idea as the aperture mode, we will have the ISO as automatic, okay? So it ranges from 100 to 3200 or whatever you set in your camera. And then with this range of ISO, it helps our camera not to open up the aperture too much. you might ask why you want the camera to not open up our aperture, right? I bought $1,000 lens or like a couple of $1,000 in Hong Kong dollars for the lens. Why do I want to control it so it doesn't open up to 1.2 or 2.0? Why we want to control into a reasonable amount of aperture? The reason is because when you open up too much, it doesn't allow the whole photos or the whole subject to be in focus. As we talk about in the aperture mode, if you open up too much, the depth of field will be quite narrow. Maybe you only focus the eye of the model. You can't see really clear her hair and her face line, the ear, or the body is not really focused correctly, or actually it's focused, but just it's blurred out, okay? Because her face would be already focused. So in that way, we will say we try to ask the camera to have a automatic ISO range, and then let the camera to decide what will be the ideal shutter, I should say the aperture range. Of course, same situation as the aperture mode, the camera actually cannot really understand how much background blur you want to have. So sometimes in some good camera, they even have a range for you to limit the aperture mode, or on the aperture side, they have a range to limit what the what we call the shutter speed. So with these two, when they can limit a little bit, or if they can fall through by the camera decide, most of the time you'll still be able to capture good photos, and you can only worry about in shutter mode to capture the moment. Okay, aperture mode is more like you create a moment, and then the shutter mode is more about you capture that moment. So this is two different ideas and two different kind of creation. Okay, aperture mode is more like you create a moment. Of course, you take a photo of some people walking around, it's still capturing a moment, but we say we mostly, it's like a portrait, you create that look, or a group of people, you create them into a group of people and align them or lay them out how do you want, or the landscape, you create that moment, or you want to add some foreground as well. And then for shutter mode, or the shutter priority mode, then that is like capture that moment. Okay, so you need to know for shutter mode how fast you need for the shutter. Of course, you say, why not we just tune to like the fastest shutter speed to capture every single thing? Yes, you can do that. At the sacrifice of the aperture mode, you might need to open up every time, like open up to full I should say fully open every time. And also you might every time need to use a very high ISO as well. So we will say in that mode, okay, this is a little bit of trick, and you might need to do it like experience, or you might need to take a photo and then you check, oh, it's too slow, or oh, it's fast enough. Then you have to check with your what photo you take, and then you have to check with it then. With this kind of setting, then the thing is you can have a more clear photo, less noise, okay, and also with a photo with a proper aperture, not like open up every single time. So as I say, one is create a moment for the aperture one, and then for shutter it's more like capture the moment. Okay, hopefully everybody understand these two concepts, and honestly most of my time I use these two mode. I know some people will say, no, photographers should use M mode only, okay? After I explain myself, I will explain to you why M mode is the last one I want to explain to you guys. Because my job, or a lot of my photography, I can't really set my camera and everything for too long. Sometimes I want to take a landscape with my family and we have a family trip together. Even though I pull out the camera and take the photos, I'm a little bit greedy, so sometimes I want to use a wide angle lens, and then maybe I want to change it to a zoom lens. You may say, why don't you use a very broad range of zoom lens, and you have the ultra wide and then the zoom range. The truth is it doesn't really, it doesn't give a very crisp photo, because those lenses tends to be not very clear. Okay, so I might have to change the lens. So this wastes a lot of time, and then you have to take the photo, and if I have to measure everything again, like the what we call the background blur and everything. You just waste too much time. Or maybe sometimes I want to go to the what we call a sport event. Okay, I don't want to think too much about what should be my aperture mode, how to set the ISO. I want to make sure I can capture that epic, incredible spot moment. Okay, I don't want to spend like 2 minutes to fine tune that aperture mode and then it's gone. Okay, this is one of the reasons why our camera now can take like multiple bursts, like Canon or Sony, like more than 10 photos per second. Okay, so 20s or 30 is the high standard now. Okay, so this is something we want to understand our photography, everything about photography now. We need to speed up the thing. We cannot let it to sit for too long. Okay, now let me explain about the manual mode. Okay, and then I will explain the modern manual mode and how do we use that to benefit ourselves. Manual mode is allowing us to set all exposure triangle, the aperture, shutter speed, and ISO, all by you. So basically, it's like you're telling the camera, I don't trust you, okay? I don't trust your judgment for the camera, okay? So I trust myself only, okay? So what kind of situation will I use the M mode, and what kind of situation, how can M mode can also help us to create? For example, even though in aperture mode or in shutter mode, you can still adjust the exposure compensation, or you can change the aperture or shutter speed, everything. You can change a lot of things by these two. You can control to a certain degree, but you can't really set to a precise value, okay? So by then, when you later on take some photography, you want, for example, you want to take a product photo, but not just one, okay? Your job is about you take maybe tens of product photos, and then each product you need to take few sides of that product. So that will be the big problem if you set it to aperture mode or shutter priority mode, because it might have some change to your photos. Although your light should be constant, everything constant, your camera might suddenly think, oh, that product is too dark. I might lighten up the photo a little bit. Or, that subject is white in color. I need to darken it a little bit. If so, every photo of yours will not be consistent. So this is a big problem if you take like a product photography in that way. You want to set everything, like you lock everything, okay? When I say you lock everything, not only the exposure triangle, I will say even the color temperature, you lock it, okay? Even though you might not get the correct, the color temperature, just lock it to one of them. Don't do octo-white balance, okay? That is the worst thing, because I have that experience with the white background, with the white product, but that white product is not actually white in color. It might have a pale green color or pale blue color. Your white balance will be off, okay? Everything will be, I should say the camera will have gone whack or something, okay? So in that situation, okay, so we will use manual mode to do it. And then I will say in this way, I don't want to guess the manual mode, what should I put, okay? Of course, some people say, use your light meter to measure everything and punch in everything in your camera, and then you get the perfect photo for every time. Those are a lot of people will say, use the light meter to do it. I will say, use your camera to help you to do it, okay? I can't say the camera is, I can't say the light meter is wrong or incorrect or whatever, but I will say it in this way. That light meter is not the same manufacturer from your camera, okay? They are not from the same manufacturer, okay? And every of our camera has a little bit inconsistent, okay? So I will let you know what is my trick to do it. First, you set to A mode. If for product photography, set it to A mode, aperture priority. Take that photos and study that photos. After you take the photos, the camera actually records 3 things, okay? 1, the aperture. Of course, you set the aperture, right? So it should record that. And then the second one, the shutter speed. The third one is what we call the ISO. And also, of course, sometimes it will, I should say most of the time, it should record also the white balance as well, this 4 factor. But anyway, we concentrate on 3 factor first. So what we do, we get this 3 number or 4 set of number, aperture, shutter, ISO, and white balance. We get everything. And then we punch in, or we should say tune in the manual mode, punch in all the figure by ourselves. And then take the photo again to see if that one match up with the aperture mode. If the photo comes out, you say it's a little bit too bright or too dark, then you can adjust your shutter speed a little bit faster or slower, or adjust your ISO faster or like a more or less. But I will suggest in product situation, because you might be on a tripod already, use the shutter speed to adjust. Don't use the ISO. ISO might give more noise. So you want even the noise to be consistent as well. And of course, as I say, please also remember to punch in the white balance. I learned it in a very hard lesson. Okay, at the end I have to white balance correct like 30, 40 products photo with every of them, 4 of them. Okay, so it's I was in hell. Okay, so although it's not too bad, 100 something is not too bad. Okay, but still, okay, remember my mistake and don't do it. Okay, so in that way, every product photo you shot with that light and also the location and everything will be consistent. That will help you to do the afterward photo and everything very, very efficiently. Because today's, unfortunately, I have to tell you guys, photographers' salary is not very ideal. So we have to find ways to speed up our workflow, okay, to allow us to work less and make more money, okay? This is one of my goals, to explain everything to you guys. How about the shutter speed? Can shutter speed also do similar thing for our manual mode? Yes. And this is also another trick. For example, if we do some kind of what we call the light painting, we can set in time in the shutter mode, and then for example how many seconds, or we want to do the light trail, we do that, and then we see the result. And then we use those number punching into the manual mode and then lock the aperture. Because, for example, if I want to do the what we call the light trail of a car, sometimes, okay, the camera might think that I might need to open up the aperture a little bit more because now it's too dark. Because when you press the shutter, it's calculating the correct exposure. And then when you push the shutter all the way down, you will start take the photos, right? When you really like waiting for a car and press it, it might be too slow. In that case, okay, so we try to get a basic idea and then use those settings and punch into our manual mode. And of course, as I say, in the aperture mode, what should be the correct aperture, what should be the correct shutter speed, ISO, and white balance as well, okay? Although in this case, white balance might not be too important, but we try to make it consistent, okay? If you set auto balance, then you set auto balance in the manual mode as well. So in this way, the good thing is we can create a duplicate of the first one, of the timer mode or the shutter mode, and then we fine-tune the photo, maybe smaller time, shorter time I should say, or longer time, or I want to have a longer time but fine-tune the aperture to be, because if I increase the time, that means I allow too much light, I need to close the aperture a little bit more, or I change the ISO. So I say we can use aperture mode and shutter mode to help us to get a good value for the manual mode. Some people say, why you waste one photos to do it, why don't you use the light meter? I explain one reason is because those two are not from the same manufacturer. And then the second reason is we might not be able to do the light metering every time. So as I say, use our camera as a light meter to give you a proper value. And also another thing is today we don't work with films, okay? We are not working with films or the OH. We have to wait 2 days to get the result, and oh my god, it's too dark, or 2 days later, oh, it's too bright, overexposed, because we can see the actual result immediately from your camera, okay? So we don't need to wait for 2 days. We only need 2-3 seconds or maybe 10 seconds to check if it's too bright or too dark. Use your modern camera's advantage with you, like together, okay? We all together to use it as in your advantage, to use it as also as a light meter to get the best result. And then this is the last trick, I should say one of the trick about the manual mode. Most of our modern camera actually can lock in manual mode, can lock the ISO, right? When you lock the ISO, your exposure compensation, the EV, will change to what we call the EV meter. It's like telling you how bright or how dark your photo is. If you have the DSLR, you can't see the actual photo until you take it, right? For our modern mirrorless camera, as one of my videos suggests, it's really good for beginners because you can see a simulation, what you will have, at least simulate brightness, what you will have. This way, okay, we can have using the ISO as an adjustment, okay, set that as octo. So this is another way to do the creativity. We set the ISO as octo. We only concentrate on the aperture and only concentrate on the shutter speed. We control this two, we lock this two, and allow the camera to vary about the ISO then. Why we want to use in this way? Main reason is that we can work most of our time or still concentrate on our creativity about composition or how much time we want to capture. So especially useful when you do something like, some moving subject and you want to have a last moment to be focused, or someone running on the sideway like that, okay? You want to capture that moment to be sharp enough, but of course for this you might need to have a flash to do the what we call the second curtain exposure, but we are not going over there. We only want to explain to you that in those situations when you want to explain in some movement and you let the camera to set the ISO to automatically. And also another thing is maybe I want to take a photo of a water drop or some bird. I know the aperture need to be set to certain amount, maybe f8 or f4, and then the shutter time has to be 1000 or something. Then I let the camera to set the ISO to be what they think should be the best value, the best exposure value. So M mode can also work in a semi-octo or semi-octo, okay, situation, allow us to only concentrate in also the creativity area, aperture and shutter speed creativity area, and let it to decide what should be the correct ISO mode. This also helps us a lot. But of course, in my situation, I would say if I use the manual mode, most of my time will lock 3 of them. Okay, even the octo white balance, I will change it to a specific value so that I will have a consistent octo balance every time if in M mode. So basically, I cover PASM 4 modes, and I conclude in this way. P mode is what we call the programmable mode. It's more or less, it's like we take street photography, which is really good. But of course, you might say aperture mode is also good enough, good for taking this way, or you can use a shutter priority mode is also okay. But I would say programmable mode is helping us to ease out all our workload. We don't need to think too much. We just want to take a good, clear photo and just concentrate on our composition and everything. A mode, I should say, is to create a moment mode, okay? Or in this mode, we let our creativity put into the photos. We allow how much background blur or background clarity into the photos. Shutter priority will allow us to capture that moment, okay? And then we will be allowing like a short period of time or long period of time to capture a moving object or something. The M mode, the manual mode, everything due by labor mode, okay, will be basically about fine-tuning everything. I will not say using M mode means you are a more superior photographer. I don't think it's really justified in this way. You might be more experienced in that way, but many photographers nowadays they don't necessarily use M mode every single time because they want to speed up their workflow as well. So this is the fourth thing, and hopefully everybody will get what I try to say. And thanks everybody attending my class. And as I say before, this class will be posted to YouTube, and thank you for YouTube allowing us to record everything and allow us to share with my friend or everybody. Okay, so in case you guys missed the section, it's okay, you can go through this section again. Very sorry that for the first 1 or 2 minutes the video feed is not going through correctly. My monitor is suddenly dead, and then I should say no battery, and it's gone. I didn't think that battery can last only maybe 15 minutes. So something I have to remember. Okay, so I have some message. Okay, I think Bob point out, because I didn't read that message, my computer of the YouTube is very far away. He lists out for bird maybe 1 of 200 or 1 out of 500. So everybody, if you guys have any question, feel free to ask or stay in the comment. I think many of us will try to answer for you guys. Thank you again. Keep update, or I should say keep an eye on our update, our schedule, and the next one will be Lumina AI. Okay, thank you for everybody attending our class. Thank you.